All right, councillors, we'll make a start. It's just a bit after 5:30, so I open the elected member council briefing. In doing so, I acknowledge that tonight we're meeting on the traditional owners of the Mangla people and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We've got one agenda item tonight to do with our risk appetite. So I'll hand over to Kathy to walk us through that item. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. Firstly, I'd like to welcome to this workshop tonight our two of our independent members of our audit committee. So we've got our chair, Grant Strawbridge, here, and Pat Christie as well. Unfortunately, Laurie Kozlovic was unable to be available for this session. He's in New Zealand. He did attend the Audit and Risk Committee meeting today, but we've had a risk workshop this afternoon and another risk workshop tonight. Sort of a bit hard to participate from New Zealand in all of those activities. So Laurie is an apology. And we also have with us sitting over there, Kiffin Thompson. Kiffin is a partner at BDO, and BDO, as members will recall, have been appointed as council's partner in the delivery of our internal audit program and our service review program. So Kiffin has worked with the audit and risk and executive team this afternoon in developing our strategic risk profile. So we've worked through that and identified 8 strategic risks that will come to the council over the coming months in terms of what we're doing with those risks from a management point of view and how we're going to control it. However, this workshop tonight, on an annual basis, and it is a better practice for us to have a collective and a collaborative workshop between the Audit and Risk Committee and the council members. It gives the opportunity for Audit and Risk Committee members and our independent members to hear from the council in terms of what your focus is and where you think the effort and so on needs to be applied in a particular topic area. And so tonight is the opportunity for that to occur on the topic of risk and risk appetite. And it's also the opportunity for the council members who to hear from the Audit and Risk Committee members as well in the context of this topic. So that's the spirit of the session tonight. Thank you, Pat and Grant, for staying over and participating in this. We appreciate that. And it's been a day full of discussions on risk. So it's a very, very important topic, and it's an exciting topic, and it's not boring in the least. And so you're all going to absolutely enjoy it. I have no doubt. Okay. So next slide, please, Irene. Thank you. Risk to dare. The word risk derives from an early Italian word risicare or rischiare, which means to dare or nothing ventured, nothing gained. In this sense, risk is actually a choice rather than a fate. It means that we can actually choose to take risks if we so wish to, or we can choose not to take risks. The actions we dare to take, which depend on how free we are to make choices of what this is actually what the story of risk is all about. So we've been working today in terms of the development of our strategic risk profile. And the purpose of this session tonight is to have a bit of a conversation with you guys about what is the council's risk appetite, particularly against three of the strategic risks that we identified today, and they're the 3 highest risks that we've identified today. So we'll have a bit more of a deep dive into those 3 risks. So this slide's also talking about the capacity to manage risk and with the appetite to take risk and make forward-looking choices. These are the key elements for any organisation in terms of moving forward. So what's our capacity to actually deal with risk, or what's our appetite to take risks and move forward towards achieving the strategic objectives that the council has set. So rather than risk being looked at as a dampener and as a blocker and as a, oh my God, we can't do this or we can't do that or whatever because it might be too big a risk for us, let's actually have a look at it and see what is our capacity to actually deal with risks if a risk is present. And although organisations use the term risk management really frequently, it can be misleading because risk is actually never really managed. It's the way that you actually deal with it. It's the way that you actually anticipate the uncertainty presented by risks, as opposed to really saying, yes, I've got this risk managed. It's how you're anticipating them and how you're dealing with uncertainty. Okay, the next slide, just briefly, the goal of effective risk management. How much risk are we willing to take on the left axis there is risk appetite. Down the bottom axis is risk exposure. You know, how much risk are we actually taking? And the goal of effective risk management is to have a balanced approach. You know, I mean, somebody may choose to take excessive risks if that's what they so choose to do, depending on what their appetite is, or you could be excessively cautious in terms of risk too. So it's dependent on looking at the actual risk itself and what the current circumstances are that you're faced with. Thanks, Harry. Some key terms before we get into any major discussion. Risk appetite is the amount of risk council is willing to assume in the pursuit of its strategic objectives. So this is always in the context of council achieving its goals, its strategic objectives. Risk tolerance is the acceptable level of deviation from a standard or an objective identified through policy or delegations, etc. So you know, you may have some tolerance to actually shift from a particular objective into a different level. And what's the capacity of the council to manage risk or to take on an objective given our resources and our obligations to residents and ratepayers? So there's three key terms there. What's our appetite, what's our tolerance, and what's our capacity? Thanks, Irene. Right, so what we're here to do tonight is to establish a common understanding of risk appetite principles and terminology, and then to seek some guidance from the council and also our independent members that are in attendance as to an appropriate level of appetite for Whyalla Council's three highest strategic risks that have been identified via a workshop this afternoon. Going to pause there. Any questions, comments, thoughts in that little piece of information that's been delivered so far? No, so you're all completely au fait with risk. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Sure. Next slide. Thanks. Okay, so risk appetite levels. As part of the briefing paper that went out to members, there were the risk appetite statements that the previous council had worked through. Those risk appetite statements were worked through back in 2020. 2020 was a very different time than 2023, nearly 2024 is. There's been a lot of developments and a lot of changes happening in the Whyalla area. So it's timely that we actually review those risk appetite statements. But you know, the risk appetite levels really don't change from year to year. You either avoid risk, that means you have little to no appetite for it. You're resistant to risk, got a small appetite for a little bit of risk. You accept it, so a medium appetite, or you're receptive, a large appetite. So you'll see I've got these around the wrong way. That's okay. What we're going to do, or what I'll show you now, before I do that, if you go to the next slide, thanks, Irene. Some questions that you need to ask yourself in terms of risk appetite is how willing are you to accept uncertain outcomes? When faced with multiple options, how willing are you to select an option that puts the objective at risk? And how willing are you to do trade-off? How willing are you to trade off the objective against the achievement of other objectives? So, there's some of the sorts of self-questions that you need to ask yourself when considering risk appetite. So, these are and I know the numbering says 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's sort of a bit of not a glitch, but it's how it unfolded in the workshop this afternoon, and we haven't had time to adjust the numbers. But they're the risk categories or the top strategic risks that have been identified today through the workshop with the Audit and Risk Committee and the council members. So, community expectations. This is about whether or not our council is actually meeting the community expectations. Organisational development, human resource management. Have we got the strategies in place to ensure that we've got the people within the organisation and the organisation developing in such a way that the objectives can be delivered? Financial sustainability and growth is pretty straightforward. Are we financially sustainable? Governance is pretty straightforward. That does include compliance, so our degree of compliance, as well as are we setting ourselves up to make good decisions? ICT is do our ICT systems actually serve us, both from the perspective of work processes and flow, cyber security, but also information management. Are we setting the strategic directions? Do we have the information we need to set the strategic directions? Are our strategic directions aligned across the organisation? Are they aligned, and are the states and federal government's directions aligned with our strategic directions? There's quite a bit in that particular risk category. Asset management, is it sufficient? Have we got too many, too little? Can we manage the assets that we've got? And the airport operations is on there because of the risks associated with the high level of compliance that is required, and also the degree of financial impact that the airport's operations has on the council. So I'm going to pause there. Any observations from anybody in relation to those risks? And does a member of the Audit and Risk Committee, either Peter, because you were in attendance, Grant, or Pat, any thoughts, comments that you'd like to share? Peter? No. Observations from anybody? Do they seem about right, do you think? Is there
What group, Kathy, did you have come to this conclusion?
what group?
Yeah. What was the cross section of the council? Was it council employees or just the manager?
The executive team and the Audit and Risk. Remembering this is strategic risk, not operational risk.
Yeah.
Justin?
Intergovernment relations.
Intergovernment relations in the strategic directions.
In terms of a risk category, it's not listed separately, but the interrelationship in terms of our organisation being able to deliver on our strategic directions, when we look at the regional context and the state context in particular, whether that should be a potential risk category.
Yeah. We did have quite some discussion on that this afternoon in terms of the alignment and the relationships and the degree of influence we have on state government and state government has on us. We felt it was captured within the risk of strategic direction, which is quite all-encompassing. But Jade or Kiffin, you might have a comment on that.
Yes, one of the bullet points below that was
seem to run out of sound.
Yep, we're fixing it.
I'm just working on the microphone. Council Ops.
so strategic direction risk number 7. Definition is ineffective alignment and delivery of strategic direction. Further expansion of risk included alignment with all levels of government. So it was the thing of making sure that thank you. So it includes alignment with all levels of government, both state and federal.
Okay, so in terms of the actual assessment of those risks, Mark, can you put us on, or Irene, can you put us on to the next slide, please? Okay. So we went through a process this afternoon of assessing what the consequence and the likelihood of each of those 8 risks were. And this is the risk matrix, which is the outcome of that process. Risks 4, 7 and 8, where they are positioned, shows that these are high risks for the council. And these 4 risks relate to the financial sustainability and growth of the council. That's risk number 4. Risk number 7 is the strategic directions, and risk number 8 is asset management. So they're the 3 highest risks that have come out of the risk assessment that we've done today. And so they're the specific risks that we would like to have a deeper conversation with the council around. Kiffen, can you perhaps provide that little bit more of a description around each of those 3 risks, please?
Thank you. So risk 4, financial sustainability and growth, which was definition was mismatch between revenue cost base and expected activity. So including business as usual, legacy and degradation of financial performance. So that includes the rates and the return of income versus the cost. The cost could well blow out versus the revenue you're receiving. Economic conditions can have an impact, etc. So that rating was, and each one of these ratings were there what's called a residual risk rating. So it's looking at how significant the risk is to achieve your strategic objectives, but also considering the likelihood of that level of risk to occur, having considered the controls are in place that manage that risk. So that based upon the collective input. So that was number 4. Number 7 is strategic direction. That's ineffective alignment and delivery of strategic direction. So that's, as I mentioned earlier, includes alignment with all levels of government. If there's a mismatch, the concern was raised about, for example, hydrogen. If all of a sudden they decide change their mind and move hydrogen somewhere else, or that type of thing. So being on the same page and working together. That was number 7. And number 8 is asset management. So inadequate asset management planning to ensure council has appropriate infrastructure to meet current and future needs. That's it.
Thanks, Kevin. Any further questions in relation to those 3? No.
Can I just have 7 again?
Item 7 again.
Yes, strategic direction is ineffective alignment and delivery of strategic direction. So that's including the misalignment, making sure council's strategies are aligned with the state and the Commonwealth, so they're all going the same direction rather than acting in different directions, as an example.
Okay. What I was hoping to do with all of your gusto is to take each one of those strategic risks individually and have a conversation about what your appetite is around that particular risk. So this conversation then will go towards if for all of those risks you have an appetite of completely avoid any of the issues or the matters that have arisen against that category, that will then go towards the degrees of controls that we as a management and as administration will develop that sit around those. Whereas if you come right up to the other end and you're happy to, you're either receptive or to accept the risks, there'll be a different nature of controls or lesser degrees of controls that will sit around that. So I just thought, instead of you all just sitting around in the horseshoe, get you up, have a bit of a conversation amongst yourselves as to what you think or where you think that lies, and then come and stand here on continue to think that we need to be in terms of managing the risk, or the first one being financial sustainability. Does that make sense? Do that. And stuff.
Or what would you like us online to do?
You drive. Have a think in terms of the four risk levels, whether avoid, resistant, accept, or receptive, and we'll come through to you as to what you're thinking. Can you see where people are standing through the camera?
No.
No? Okay. We'll describe it. So we've got the majority of members standing at the accept, receptive area of tolerance and appetite for risk. Do you want to perhaps talk to us about why you're standing there? What's going through your mind as to, in terms of financial risk, why are you standing in the accepting, receptive area of the continuum? What's going through your mind?
Well, for me, I'll go first, since everybody's rushing for it. For me, I feel like you often need to take a risk in order to move forward. If you don't take risks, then you avoid either going backwards or just everything staying exactly the same. Financial risks are obviously difficult. It's a bit like when you buy a house, you take a risk that you'll be able to continue to make the payments and that sort of thing, or for the end goal. So I think as long as it's going to say managed, even though you say you don't potentially manage risk, as long as it's managed and monitored, I think it's acceptable to have to take risks to a certain extent.
Thank you.
Sharon, in a business like this, you've got to accept the financial risk and you just got to manage the best you can. You can't hide from it. You can't be receptive to it. It is what it is, and you just got to accept what it is and manage it the best you can, especially in a large organisation like this.
Totally agree. And I think the reason why we're all standing here is because we've been on this journey. We've got the information. We know we're not financially sustainable. So I think we're all in the same area of, right, what can we do now?
Well, I disagree with my learned colleague over there. I don't believe you have to accept risk. I believe in being receptive, that you look at every single item that comes up and then you determine whether you avoid, you're resistant, you accept, or you you shape it to fit the facts and whether in fact you should accept, resist, or avoid. So I think everything should be receptive. You don't just rule it out until you've looked at it, identified whether it is a risk. If it is a risk and you can look after that risk, then you can possibly take it on. But I don't agree that you just, well, that's the name of the beast, so you've got to accept it. So I'm receptive to everything as long as everything is then analysed.
Anybody else? Grant or Pat, any comments in terms of risk appetite for financial sustainability?
Quite hard for you to decide in this way, because often what happens is that you look at financial risks and you say, financial risks it's this way, but financial opportunities it's this way, and you might have a different risk appetite depending on whether it's the risk, the negative, or whether a risk in that negative sense, or an obligation risk, as opposed to an opportunity. So it's a little bit hard when you've got the two combined as you have here, because if you think of what that risk was, it was about not having the revenue and cost base to do the things that are expected of you. So there's a dual management thing there. One's about finding the revenue, reducing the costs, and making sure that the things that are expected of you are things that you can do. So that's a little bit tricky, but I certainly understand why people have gone where they have, which is we're in a bit of a stew and we need to find ways to increase our financial viability, I suppose. And so you're open to doing things differently. And
this one for me depends on what time horizon you're looking at, because you can, as Phil said, you can assess each one on its individual merits. But if you look at this one a bit more holistically and say financial sustainability is a structural issue, and we look at our cost base and revenue base at the moment, and the cost is outstripping revenue, and the expected program going forward's got further costs. So it comes down to, and you look at the forward projections in the long-term model, it's year 3, 4 is when the payback starts. And each year that seems to get pushed out. We've had variances this year, already taken variances into the budget, which will come to the committee. So it comes down to the council. How long are you open to kicking the can down the road on hope that it'll turn around before you actually intervene and make a structural change? So you've got a structural issue, and you say, yep, we can assess it, we'll take these risks, but at what point do you say, no go, or this is the ceiling, we're not going to pass that, or by this date we're not going to pass it, or these are the events that need to happen to change our mind. So part of it's pretty hard just looking at this in isolation, because you've got to look over what horizon you're making the assessment. So that's something that I think the council needs to start thinking about. How long will you kick the can down the road on this one here? At what point do you say, no, we cannot keep going the path we're going? If borrowing's going up, because, you know, cash flow is still strong, so you can fund yourself, but you start to see borrowings going up, and that revenue and cost jaws are changing. The cost jaw is higher than the revenue jaw. To get that back in whack is pretty hard to do. So that's just something to think down the track as you look at your long-term model. How long are you going to accept it and accept hope? Because there's a big piece of hope sitting in your strategy at the moment.
Thank you, Grant. And I think, I mean, that's a demonstration in terms of how risk appetite changes over time. And as we're looking at, you know, in terms of the long-term financial position of the council, that in the adoption of the annual business plan and budget in the last year, we had built into the budget some budget repair or some long-term financial repair strategies in 2026, 2025, 2026. But as our costs keep increasing, and if those elements do not actually eventuate in 25, 26, when is it that you do actually change your position in terms of the risk? So the risk you're taking at the moment is those elements will come in with additional revenue opportunities in 25, 26, and we will also make some cost savings. When and how do you keep looking at that and make a different decision in terms of the risk profile of the council? Peter?
With the benefit of what Pat and Grant have said, and also something that Justin's mentioned a long time ago, of the two aspects of the running costs and the business as usual of Whyalla, with the income and the outgoings that we have, in contrast to the enormity of the opportunity ahead for us. Looking at it with one, painting it with one brush is difficult, but I think my general input would be the receptive idea of, if you were ever going to take a punt on anything, and obviously you mitigate the risk as much as you can, but with what's in the pipeline for Whyalla, I think now would be the time of any time in Whyalla's history, from what I'm understanding, that with what is ahead, that now is a time where you would really look to invest, mitigate your risks as much as possible, prudent management everywhere you go, but that now would be a great time to invest, knowing what is on the horizon.
I'd challenge the council saying, in your overall numbers, what's the investment side and what's the BAU side? Because I look at your budget and your long-term financial model is BAU. Where's the big bets that are being made and funding being allocated to the big bets? It's not. Still with the legacy, or just run the BAU business, waiting for this magical piece of revenue to come. So I think you've got to sit back and look at where are we making the bets at the moment for the revenue to come in the future.
Okay, stay there. The next risk is around strategic direction. Stephen, do you want to share more around? We've had a bit of discussion around that. Did you want to share a bit more? Put it in.
Strategic direction. Oh, thank you. The one sentence descriptor was ineffective alignment and delivery of strategic direction. So some of the other background points behind that was systems approach, lack of systems approach to strategic directions, lack of articulation of strategic direction, failure to plan for the risk of failure to plan for change, inappropriate allocation of resources, inconsistent knowledge and commitment and progress towards the strategic direction, lack of understanding of direction, alignment with all levels of government, even the competitors, in regards to other councils, also competing for your opportunities.
And thank you. The Council of Order has just asked whether we can get those dot points up on the screen so that we can actually see that. Irene, is that
That's the slide back, the white slide. Just some context. Yeah. Just so we know what we're talking about.
yeah, strategic direction? Yeah.
So number 7, I guess.
Number 7,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
So number 7,
Yeah.
on the other chart. But 7 is in that.
In the yes, it's a high risk.
So we're in a high risk area.
Yep. So again, in terms of risk management, risk appetite, etc., where do you see? I mean, those risks that have been identified around, inappropriate alignment or misalignment between strategies, council's objectives, the relationships between us and the state government and the federal government, etc. Where and how and what degree of effort do we need to put into managing that risk? So what's, putting this question in a slightly different context, do we want to put lots of controls around it and actually start managing this risk, or not start managing, we are managing it, but to put lots of controls around this risk so that it's actually avoided and we move to, you know, sort of having absolutely brilliant relationships, great alignment, etc. of all of our strategies? Or is there a degree of acceptance of the risk and less resources going towards that? Where do you see this one? Yeah. So there's a bit of a shift towards. No, okay. So, Jade, do you want to talk a little bit why you've gone to up the end towards avoid?
Because we're just seeing the benefits of the alignment coming closer than it previously has. And I'm tired of writing grant applications on my own. And geez, it would be nice if the 3 tiers of government all had the same objective, and had an Australian strategic plan of which Whyalla was a part.
Anybody else want to comment in terms of, Tammy, do you want to comment in terms of where and how your thinking lies?
Definitely something that we've got to keep fostering. Teamwork makes the dream work. That is our motto. And the more teams that we've got playing the game with us, the more that we can get done. So I see it as a very important step to keep fostering that. And I'm receptive to change as well. There's opportunities out there. I don't think we're covering everything. Like I said, we're waiting for that moment to happen. We're getting ready for that big boom, but there's still more. So I accept that we need to foster those relationships. I'm receptive for change and getting ready for the big boom.
Can I ask a quick question about, or maybe if you just elaborate again on what these mean? Because I'm looking at these. Yeah, I think so. Because I'm looking at avoid, resistant, accept, receptive, essentially to like a scoring system of like, you know, least amount of risk, most amount of risk. But Phil's parked himself over here, but I reckon, I don't know if you'd be most amount of risk for everything, as you said before. Receptive, open to acknowledge them, yes. But is that, are you accepting the most amount of risk for every?
No, here we get back to our interpretations.
Yeah.
I see receptive being open-minded.
Yeah.
About whatever the proposition is, and then analyse that item one by one. Do we avoid it? Do we resist it? Do we accept it? To me, my interpretation is if I stand in front of any of those 3, it means straight away I've avoided it, I've resisted it, or I've accepted it. Here I'm saying everything needs to be analysed, and then you determine whether you go ahead or you don't. That's my interpretation.
So avoid is little or no appetite, resistant, small appetite. The accept is the medium appetite, and then receptive is a large appetite to the risk. So that's, I'm looking at it different. Yeah.
So
I don't think you can avoid it. You can't avoid it. You got risk, you got to manage it. It's how you manage it. So I think avoid is not even a, you can sort of resist it and accept it. But I think you've got to be, if you're in the middle with maybe a little step to the left towards accepting, you can't avoid it, you can resist it. You can be receptive to it, but at the end of the day, you get.
Just put in both of those camps, but I'm not going to try to stretch my legs out.
Well, that's what you just said, Councillor Todd, about resistant, or so little, small, medium, or large. When it comes to the topic that we're talking about now, which is the alignment of local, state, and federal government, to some degree, I want to just get us all aligned, but then knowing that part of that's going to be out of our control and we need to move and start planning and doing things that's going to happen quicker than perhaps those bigger cogs will turn. That's where I start to lean towards, well, maybe we just move ahead anyway, based on the best information we have at the time. And that's why I'm sort of, in between small to medium appetite for that type of risk. That maybe we go a little bit awry of what the state and federal will do, but at least we're moving in a direction that we think in good faith we should be heading towards.
I think this is where it comes to the place of that opportunity. If we've not been able to achieve the alignment or as much alignment as what we were wanting to achieve with the other levels of state government and federal government and actually achieve the objectives that we're setting out to do, where is the opportunity then that we can actually craft and pull this together ourselves? So yes, I can see what you're saying in terms of moving along the continuum there. Yeah.
I guess also another reason I stand at this end, we're talking about the future and the big boom. Now, without being glum, it could be some years before councils' tools actually get the money. Everybody else might get it, the developers, the businesses. By the time we get our share, that could still be some years away, even if the boom has started. So therefore, I see whatever the proposition is, I'm receptive, but if I don't think it's going to work, then I avoid it.
Yeah. Councillor Knox or Councillor Campbell, any comments or thoughts in terms of the strategic directions risk and where our appetite level might be?
I sort of agree with the comments that are being made, but it raises a question in my mind. I know that we, in the past, have looked at the state government strategic plan when we're developing our own, but I don't ever recall seeing one from the Commonwealth. And I'm just wondering, is there such a beastie? And does the state government take that into consideration when it does its own strategic plan?
Yeah, there are many different strategies of the federal government, along the lines of economic development or health or community development, etc. It's not one strategic plan for Australia. Does the state government align with the federal government's directions? In part, yes, it would need to, but it's not one document.
Okay.
Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, being fairly new, I still have, I would say, small to medium. But that, of course, is based on reports and what's happening at the time. So if I was to choose a constant, it would be small to medium and just take on each risk for each thing as it comes, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you. Justin, any comments that you want to add into this?
Not specifically for this subject of strategic directions. Can I go back to financial sustainability?
Yep, sure.
I think Grant made the point earlier about it's a matter of what context you look at and what risk you as councillors are prepared to take. And if you did the pub test, if you think about financial sustainability, what appetite have you as councillors got for massive cost overruns on capital works programs? What level of appetite have you got for the CEO to go and recruit 25 extra staff that are not within the budget?
Yeah, last year almost.
None at all.
So unfortunately, with some of these subjects, if you go to the very high level, it gets hard to work through it. But if I keep going with financial sustainability, so clearly there's a great desire for good cost control, good treasury management, good financial procedures, internal controls, etc. That all contribute to the financial sustainability. At the other end, what's your level of appetite that council actively encourages, facilitates, and supports housing development that's going to grow council's revenue base over the next X number of years. Yeah. And again, if you unpack that, I've said facilitate it. What level of appetite has the council got to actually go and potentially purchase land from the state government and speculatively support development? So we land bank and we then sell land to private developers. Where's the appetite there? So I just wanted to, I suppose, unpack that one a little bit, that when you look at the different frames, there'll be a different level of appetite. But then when you wrap it up into the broader subject, you need to make that overall assessment in terms of what level of risk are you prepared to take? Because if we continue to be financially unsustainable, we're not going to be able to deliver council strategic plan because we just won't have the funding base to do it. At present, we're basically banking on future revenue, and the audit committee, audit and risk committee, have continued to wave a red flag. We're aware of that red flag. So at present, the council's appetite to be financially unsustainable in the short term is a greater acceptance and tolerance of risk at this point in time. But if someone pokes a pin in the hydrogen bubble and all of a sudden hydrogen is not the next best thing, can you imagine where the appetite swing will go back if, you know, we continue to have a significant operating deficit and that future revenue base that we're banking on, you know, evaporates overnight. So this is a fluid thing that councillors are going to constantly have to revisit these risk appetites. I think the purpose of tonight's session is to understand where the council group ultimately sits so that we can actually define where it is on the continuum. I'm not sure if we do. I think we do that on each risk category.
We're doing that on the continuum in terms of the three top risks tonight. Not going to do it on each risk category, but certainly the three top risks so that we can get that bit of an understanding. And this will shift over the term of the council and over time as more information becomes available in terms of the strategies that the council is actually pursuing. And as the strategic plan evolves further through the strategic management framework, this will also evolve because you'll have more information in terms of what are your actual strategic objectives. Whilst we know that hydrogen and the development of the city is the absolute primary one, there will be other strategic objectives that come through the strategic planning process that will be more refined. Yeah. Okay. So the third large risk, strategic risk, is around asset management. Kiffin, do you want to remind us about that one?
Yeah. Inadequate asset management planning to ensure council has appropriate infrastructure to meet current and future needs.
Is there some of the more information around that?
Council's ability to properly maintain its current assets, infrastructure risk failure of key assets, lack of funding for asset projects, asset protection, safety issues. Many assets are failing before we react. Concern about council's financial capacity to manage assets and infrastructure.
So again, there, our risk appetite around the management of our assets. Most people heading towards the avoid end.
I don't think you can avoid. You have to accept that they're there.
Yep. Yep.
I think avoidance about infrastructure and maintenance and whatnot has got us in the place that we're at today. We've got a lot of very aged facilities. If we kept up with them maybe years and years ago, we might not be in a situation where we've got so many buildings that are at the end of their life and whatnot. So asset management, I think, should be pretty high priority.
I think you've got to accept it and manage it best you can. with the funds you've got and the time frame you've got, and prioritise where you want to spend your money.
So I'm
Sure.
I'm looking at it from a different headset to you, councillor, sorry, Deputy Mayor Pond. I'm looking at it from, you know, I've got a smaller appetite for, managing the infrastructure that we could get rid of. That there's shit we've got that needs to go. So, and then you manage, I would then say I would be medium for the things that we have to keep and we have to manage and we have to keep an eye on. So for everything, I would sit here, but then for individual assets, I would be up and down the line according to the asset. There's things that are dangerous, and I have absolutely no appetite for anything that constitutes a dangerous situation. That's probably I'm a bit of a risk taker, but I would avoid any risk that is potentially going to cause anybody any harm. So I think I would move depending on the asset that we were discussing, and at the moment I sit here because I just think we've got some things that potentially we need to divest ourselves of. Is that the word I'm looking for? Get rid of, handball them to somebody who wants them, and focus on the things that we have to have or the things that are easier to manage. So
I just think management of either investing, upgrading, or getting rid of.
Yeah.
Whatever category it is.
Yeah.
Like totally.
That's the because that sounds like the same thing to me. Is no risk to keep assets that are costing the council money and have no upside, and that's why I would put myself fairly and squarely over here in the avoid column. But avoid doesn't. I think the words they throw me off a bit, because I just think I have no appetite to keep a building that is deteriorating and costing the community money. So that's why I put myself over here. So if that's what this represents, then that's where I am. But as far as if it was receptive or accept meant that you would get rid of those assets, then I'd be over there. So I really think that these words don't fully represent, but my appetite for holding on to a non-performing asset that's a massive liability, whatever the words are to get rid of it, or little to no appetite, would be what I would go, which is what I'm hearing you saying and what I'm hearing Deputy Mayor Pond saying.
I think what you've said, it's asset versus asset, because if we want our roads and our footpaths and our curbs to be safe and up to scratch, we have to accept how much it's going to cost to do that over a period of time. But yes, if it's just something else, it could be avoided completely.
Okay, thank you. Grant or Pat, any comments? Again, I know this is sort of difficult on the continuum, and it's that opportunity versus risk. Any comments in terms of that conversation?
Sounds like the council are onto it. So you've considered it. You've taken a view on it. The only thing I would say is the council seems to be very receptive to options and opportunities. What I don't see in your forward plan for the next 3 years is what is that expected activity? So what are some of those opportunities being considered? I go back to my previous comments. It's a BAU. Justin started talking about some of those bets around land banking and so forth. Where's that captured? How's it being prosecuted? When are you going to see some outcome from it? Because as I said, all I see is just BAU and how do you get more effective on your services, rather than here is a bet in this area and we're willing to take a risk to get an outcome. So it's just something as you go through the next planning processes, where are those bets being? What are they? What are we going to do? And what are we going to allocate money for actually to see an outcome for that may not have a payback in the next 3 to 5 years? Because you are got your pants hanging out a little bit on this one, because you are exposed to what federal and state government will do. And I think, you know, you may want to lobby or think of other ways of moving that along, or is there something you can give them a pleasure or a pain point in this? That's normally where you get behavioural change. Can you try and forecast or give them the vision for the future that excites them? Because, you know, Justin touched on it. It's not only you got the federal with their cash, you got the state premier with his cash, but then you got the departments looking at each other. Who's going to make the first move here? And they'll only move when they have to move on this. They don't see it as a priority. So, you know, you are open to the vagaries of government at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Knox.
Just a couple of quick comments. I think the biggest risk we have is the airport, and I think council needs to seriously devote some time to thinking about the airport and whether council should in fact run the airport. But something else springs to mind as well. We're talking about buildings that are no use to council or old buildings that are starting to cost council money. Over 12 months ago, in the life of the previous council, we had a report on all those sorts of properties. That report has come back to the current council some time ago, but nothing is happening with it. It's always been put in the drawer and forgotten about.
Thank you, Councillor Knox. There is work actually underway in terms of all of the buildings and the leases and licenses and so on. But yes, accept that that is certainly a comment that is coming through around action on the buildings that council has, and to take that forward. Justin.
I was going to ask the question before, but I think now would be a good one off the back of Councillor Knox's question. Comment was just made that we don't want to, we've got no tolerance at all having buildings used if they're a risk to public safety. We've got zero or very little tolerance if the buildings are at end of life and no longer really serviceable or delivering public value. I go straight to Tandera markets, and my view is that they should be closed immediately. What's the council's appetite to close or shut down or divest a building like that when you know there's going to be a community response?
And the reason I wanted to jump in, I would like to make a decision on that when I can see here are the cons, as in here's how much it's costing the community to keep Tandera up and running. Here are the benefits as far as and you know, what are the other drawbacks of closing it down, and what are the benefits of closing it down? So another drawback would be, well, there'll be people that have always known that as they get, you know, fulfillment there, and they do this, they're crafting and cross stitching. So those people are that's a big negative. But then the positive is it's income or focus and resources that we can put elsewhere. So if I had an understanding of that, I would go, yeah, let's vote. And then make the potentially unpopular decision to close it based on this accurate data.
We had an incident there during the week, and it's the first time we've been there for a long time. And I wished I never went in there, because if you were serious, you'd shut the place tomorrow. You would have shut it yesterday. If you were super serious before somebody gets seriously hurt in that joint.
I would support the close of it if we did exactly as Councillor Border said. We have a very clear-cut report, what the issues are, how much it would cost to get it up to an acceptable standard, and if the cost was higher than I can reach, and I figure it will be, we have no alternative but to go to the community and say it would cost this amount. Council cannot afford this. The ratepayers cannot afford it. We bite the bullet and make that decision as tactfully, yes, with the right explanation. So yes, I have no qualms, despite the history, despite the relevance, that I can see it closed if we do the right report job and highlight to the community how much it will cost. And this council and this community can't afford that.
My fear is, like I talked before, is if something happens to somebody down there, it's going to be horrible.
I have certainly been in sections, particularly perhaps where the woodworking is done, and I did not want to look around. And I wasn't there as an elected member on the occasion, so.
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily want to sort
Yeah.
of go deep
Oh,
dive
yes.
into this, but the reason why I called that out in part was that Deputy Mayor Pond raised the comments before that the issue that we've got now is largely being based on the decisions that have gone before us. Councils in the past, in terms of that spectrum, have accepted a greater level of risk with those buildings being used in the context that they couldn't afford to replace them or upgrade them. So we've got the product of those decisions with us now. And to add to Kathy's response, Councillor Knox, we have got a series of reports coming to Council, which will actually start to look at each one of these buildings. I'm just going to flag that it's not just one. There's going to be a lot of buildings, and when you add them all up, it's going to hurt. And just whilst we've been sitting here, I've also got a text message from one of our ratepayers also complaining about the boom gate at the airport not working, and why is it that nothing ever works in Whyalla?
I was going to add to the fact that besides Tandera, there's probably a half dozen others that are in the same boat, exactly the same.
I think we need to make some tough calls. I still say, whether it's Tandera or any other building, I have got very little appetite for keeping council's money going to, because essentially you're just throwing it down a hole. They're getting worse and worse and worse. We're never going to be able to afford to repair or reinstate them to the state, to the standard that we would like them to be. And I just think you have to, at some point.
Can I chuck in just one extra one? Sorry, I said I wasn't going to deep dive. What if I said that our rec centre needed to be closed tomorrow? Where's your appetite for closing the rec centre tomorrow? If we brought back a report along the lines of what you just asked for, if we brought back a report and said we can't afford to maintain or upgrade the rec centre, what's your appetite to close it?
There's a subjective community good, and I would rate just off the cuff Tandera, rec centre. And so I think those two things, but then if you said the risk of someone injuring themselves and a massive liability at the rec centre was also that high, as long as we have the hat rack to hang our hat on, we're closing it for this reason, not just on a whim because we're an evil, nasty council, then I would be prepared to make that bold decision. But on the face of it, without seeing that, I'm thinking, no, the last thing we would want to do is close the rec centre because it's so frequently used, unless the risks were so high that you have to shut it. But I feel like Tandera has a low public use, bless their consults, and a massive risk. Whereas I would say, well, I feel as though the inverse is happening at the rec centre, where there's a massive public good, and there's, apart from the water perhaps not being as clean as it could be, and we've worked on that and working on that, that the risk is significantly lower.
It's, sorry,
Sharon's next.
No, Tammy.
Oh, sorry, Tammy.
That's all right. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. In informative decisions, once we've got all the information in front of us, we're making those decisions. That's why we've been elected, for the better of the community. So it's informed decision making. I think we also do need to look at the community value to these assets as well. Like Councillor Border said, Tandera would not stand close to the value of the rec centre to the community. And for things like Tandera, I think they just need somewhere to go to. So another facility where they can go and still do their arts and crafts and have their bonding time and their social activities and whatnot. I don't think it's actually the place that they're connected to so much. It is important to our history, but I'm sure that people at Tandera, it's not going to be as tricky as we think. But definitely, I think we need to look at that community value to each individual asset.
Basically, I agree with what you've both said, so I'm not going to repeat it all.
Yeah, I'm a bit the same, but if you come to us, Justin, and said there's a chance that somebody's going to get killed, maimed, or injured at the rec centre, it's not a popularity contest. We didn't get elected to be popular. If you said that to us, I don't go and shut the rec centre tomorrow. Absolutely zero.
And can I just throw in one very political comment? And that is, any of these hard decisions need to be made in the next 12 months before it gets close to an election. I say no more.
Thank you for handing it back to me on that comment. Um, uh, thank you for that conversation. I mean, I think that that gives us insight into your risk appetite around the state of the buildings and around the utilisation and public risk scenario of those buildings. I mean, we do know that many of our buildings have got very high public risk to them. It's like the Foreshore Cafe when that was closed in 2020. It's like the Fauna Park when that was closed in 2021. The high degree of public risk that surrounded those buildings necessitated the council of the day making those hard decisions. And you've basically shown us tonight that your risk appetite around those public buildings that have got high public risk, you are not in a position of avoiding those risks as past councils have done. You would prefer that those risks are actually dealt with, and we need to come to you with the information and the data for you to make those decisions so that they can actually be made. So in terms of asset management and asset management planning and this final risk here, I think that in terms of the actual assets themselves, from that conversation, I would place you down at the end of you don't want those risks to continue. You need those risks to be addressed and you want the resources put to those risks in order to address them. But you also recognise the community value that also needs to be achieved. But the community is not the first answer here. It's actually the public risk that has been posed by those assets, which is your first priority. Would that be a fair summary in terms of your your appetite there? Okay. I'm going to see whether or not we pause now and for dinner, have a break and have some dinner. And then we will reconvene in 10 minutes or so. Yep. Sounds good. Thank you. Shall we kick off again? Sounds good. Fabulous. Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, our intent was to discuss the three highest risks in this context of risk appetite. I just want to have a brief conversation now to round out the discussion on appetite and then move into a more general open question session about anything and everything, as we ordinarily do at the briefing sessions, and with the benefit of having Pippin and Grant and Pat here, you know, there's the opportunity to ask any questions that you may wish also from them. But just around this discussion out, the top four risks of financial sustainability, strategic directions and asset management, I think it's fairly clear in terms of that conversation. Those risks are up in the high band there, in the orange band, which are rated as a residual risk of being high. They're the ones from the basis of the conversation that we've had that we believe that there needs to be a focus on, and that the management of those risks will be reported and monitored through into the Audit and Risk Committee meetings. And we will keep a close eye on those in terms of the resources that go towards them, and then the balance in terms of the way that that risk is managed. So that middle band there, those risks in the yellow, and Irene, if you want to just go back to the previous no, yes, that one. So those risks that are in the yellow band, which is the moderate level, they've been assessed from a residual risk point of view at the moderate level, are around community expectations, organisational development and human resource management, governance, ICT, and airport operations. So if you can go back again, Irene, to the risk matrix. First question I want to ask is, based on your knowledge of the business and based on your knowledge of those items, do you think that those risks in the medium level are about right, or should any of them shift into high or low or extreme?
Maybe the airport situation should move.
Yep.
Yeah.
We don't have a manager at the airport at the moment, do we?
No, not at the moment.
Well, it's one of our biggest assets.
Pardon?
It's one of our bigger assets.
Yes, it is.
It's one of our bigger liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a manager.
That process is underway in terms of ensuring that we've got the proper management structures in place. So you're suggesting that needs to shift?
That maybe should shift for a short term.
Yeah, I'm with Bill. I think the airport's a massive risk at present.
Thank you. Councillor Knox?
I'm still eating, but sorry about that. I think the airport needs to go into the red. I think it is a huge risk. We did try and offload it a while back. And there was some discussion still with Adelaide Airport, but I really do think it is a huge risk for us, the operation of the airport, and costs versus income, and yeah, the whole thing.
Just in making a comment, at the Audit and Risk Committee meeting today, the committee considered the project outlines for 3 service reviews, one of which is around the airport, and that body of work in terms of having a look at the operations of the airport will kick off fairly quickly. So we've got some strategies around it to actually look at what it is that we're doing based on also the previous council resolution to have a look at the operating models. But if it is the will of the council, we can certainly shift the level of risk of the airport for the moment. Not saying that it would necessarily be in the higher risk categories on an ongoing basis, though.
On a temporary basis, yes, it should be moved.
To ensure that we have a focus.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. What about the other risks there? Happy with where they're at? So, yeah. IT, information computers, sort of, it includes knowledge management, information management, all of our systems, cyber security, etc. So the ones that are left is community expectations, organisational development, governance, ICT, those 4 in the medium.
I personally think it's hard to say where they should sit with just a name and then a matrix.
Okay, all right. Given I don't have and wasn't able to distribute the more detailed information to the rest of the elected members, given we were only workshopping it today, why don't we pause this discussion now, and we'll bring through a report in terms of the risk profile with the more detailed discussion around each of these risks, so that you'll have that in front of you, and we'll revisit them in that context so that you've got the information.
I think that's really important, because I think it's too hard to say where they should sit with just a headline and a matrix. There's no guts to it, in my opinion.
No, absolutely fair enough, and that's a very fair call. So not a problem. I mean, tonight's discussion really was to follow on from the work that the Audit and Risk Committee did today, to start having a risk discussion with this council. This is the first risk discussion that we've had collectively to get a bit of an understanding as to where your risk appetite might be, or where your mind is and where your position is in terms of the management of risk. Because if you're a council that has wants to avoid every single risk that the council faces, then we'll be putting significant resources to avoiding risk, and that will be at the detriment of, seeking other strategic strategic objectives that the council is looking to achieve. So we need to have this conversation. This was the start of it. It will help us now starting to frame some of the positions moving forward that we'll bring back to you for further discussion.
Yeah, well, we just had a bit of a chat amongst ourselves before, and we actually thought it'd be a good idea if we all hopped on a bus once and identify and go and have a bit of a look at the council infrastructure and assets and risks that we have around the place. Just just as a group, jump on, make a list of 10 or 15 on Saturday morning or something. The people available, jump in the bus and go for a look around. So we can actually have a walk around, look at them, discuss amongst ourselves what we think.
Pardon?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea, and we'll put it into the forward program and get something organised. I think those sorts of strategies, having the conversations while you're out there, being able to eyeball the actual assets themselves and the city, so that then you can start talking about, well, where do we want the resources to go? Really good idea. Peter.
On the topic of appetite for risk, I think the feeling that I'm getting from not just the whole day, but specifically once all the council members have been here, is that we are ready to make these bold decisions to say, if that's going to cost the community excessive money over the coming years, and there's very little public value, that the boldness that we talked about in February is ready to be, I think, put forward. So putting the ball over into admin's court, I think, in the most respectful, polite way, to say, yeah, when is that decision required of us? To say, we've been to the site, we've been on the bus, we've viewed Tandera, for example, we've seen, no, this can't continue. Yes, there will be backlash. We need to communicate it effectively, but let's get that strategy going. Knowing that it's going to take resources, there's always too much to do. But I think that's the feeling that I get, is, yeah, that the appetite is there to make those bold decisions.
Just say that in the interests of really good decision making, you need to have a fair amount of material before you. That's not like masses, but you need to, yes, eyeball the place, because that gives you a better view. But you need to know these are the properties that are dicey. Not quite the term, but anyway, these are the issues with those properties. These are what it would cost to fix, or they can't be fixed. These are the community benefits from the use that's there. These are the alternatives that you could give the people who use this, so that there's not the community backlash, and so that they don't come back and say, well, actually, what do we get for our rates other than you collected our bins?
Yeah.
And you've got numerous buildings. Is there something that the knitting group could go to the library or something, so that you rehome them? You need all that information, and then you can make proper decisions, and not just property by property, but the top 10 or 15 or however many is your list of properties. And that's when you make good governance decisions, when you've been given all that information. And it doesn't have to be in masses, but it's the base information that you need to make those decisions, and then you need to make the decisions.
Yeah. You got this.
So I was going to say something along those lines, that I think it's more than just a drive out on the bus and eyeballing it. We need all of the information, as you've just said. The other thing I was going to say is, I think what I've picked up from the last hour or so is that we are going back to what the mayor said early on in the piece, when he described him being receptive to looking at each different situation and then making a decision whether to avoid or accept the risk for that. I think I feel like we're all at that kind of point as well. We're not going to have a blanket position on risk. It will change according to what's put in front of us. But I agree with what you're saying. We need more than just, we need all of the facts to be able to make a decision, to make an informed decision whether the constituents, the people who pay the rates, the people who elected us, whether they like it or not. If we've made a decision from an informed position, then I think we can't do any better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably repeating myself to what I said earlier, but having that information of informed decisions, that's what we need. We need the information. Getting on the bus, I know from previous council that was very beneficial for us to go out as a group and actually have a look at each of these sites. We could have discussions on site. It just value adds to the information that we're getting. But I think the important bit as well is the alternatives, offering the alternatives. If we go in and say, we're shutting Tandera down, that's it, bang, we're going to get that backlash from the community. But if we go in and say, we've done a risk assessment, we've had a look at the alternatives, it is not safe, but we can offer, that is where we're going to save ourselves.
If I can have another moment, I totally agree that that needs to be a real critical factor, is the future focus. And to your point, Pat, I remember seeing a document a while ago now, a few council meetings ago, which was very lengthy, and it went through, I think it was most, if not all, of the council-owned buildings, and it actually had like essentially a quantified community good or a community value attributed to it. And so I think just revisiting that and then making the decisions on it. So I think the information is there.
Absolutely.
Just have to make
Yeah.
But what would the next step be? I guess would be my question. What's the next step in that?
We have some very detailed information around all of the council's buildings, inclusive of the condition of the building itself, what its utilisation is in terms of community groups, what the public value is that's being achieved out of it, what the costs of renewal and improvements that are required for it. So all of the data is there. The body of work that hasn't yet been done in its entirety is having the conversations with the community groups, or understanding where the community groups can go to in moving them from building X to building Y, and then where, and understanding where we may well be able to combine different community groups together into the one building at different times, or whatever the case might be, so that we're actually getting good utilisation out of the buildings. So yes, there is a large piece of work that has been done. There's still more work that needs to be done on it, but it is happening. Mark.
Kathy, thank you. And what I'm hearing is we're looking at the condition of assets, et cetera, who the users are, blah, blah, blah. But I haven't heard anything around how much work have we done around what are our asset needs for the future. There needs to be a context for all of this, and the context should be future based. What are we heading towards in terms of fulfilling our asset needs?
And you're absolutely right that there needs to be that clarity around what do we need and what negotiations we've had with agencies. And whilst it hasn't come to council, there has been some examples of engagement with community organisations, junior soccer, the YTech building, the Canine Club, and others around their future needs and what council can actually provide. And so some of those have been around, a fee for service in terms of the leasing arrangement or the license agreement. Some of those have been around asset management. Some of those have been around moving one organisation and what do we need to provide them, so that we can actually take another organisation who would be better placed. And so the example of that is around the work we're doing at Jubilee Park.
Okay. think we should need to probably close out that one, but I can't help myself. I'm going to make a statement / a question. I just want to put to the elected member group that we are about to create a great level of disruption within our community, because when you actually look at the buildings, there won't be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. There'll be, you know, a dozen plus buildings. So I'll just test in this context of risk appetite. Are you prepared to have 15 community groups all pissed off with council at the same time?
Yeah, so we'll shoot it once and draw it as
All right, I'll just put it out there. And just adding to that, without wanting to whatever the right term is, something that we haven't really engaged with yet is the question about community buildings on council or state government lands. One of my pet subjects, I'll confess a conflict of interest in advance, boat sheds and wreck fishers on our foreshore. I'm going to say it is not the highest and best use of our foreshore. It's something we haven't explored yet, but again, just want to check with the elected member group. Do you want to tackle that? Because last time we went anywhere near that, which was through the foreshore master plan process, we had a number of marine users come out of the 12th hour, and the council decided to put the marina to one side and not touch it on the basis that we got feedback from 5 or 6 marine based users that they didn't want to have the foreshore change. Just want to check, are you up for that?
I reckon I'm going to come in on that one. First up, it was a poorly addressed part of the master plan for the marina, inadequately addressed, and therefore should not have been included. The marina still needs a master plan. That's more than just do we kick out 3, because if you kick them out, they're all water based, and have we got an alternative for them? So I partly go against what you're saying in that it might be a valuable piece of real estate. The community will want to have a big say in what happens to that real estate. And the master plan was flawed, and in private conversations with a couple of the consultants, they acknowledged that to me, that was sort of, well, we'll throw it together. So I think there's more work to be done on that. But before we get off this, I said to the CEO during our break that I think one of the greatest things that's happened tonight is the fact that our audit committee has been, whoever came up with the suggestion that the audit committee be here is an excellent idea. I fully support what Grant said about the audit committee becoming far more involved a lot sooner than when it's too late at budget time. Because I think the audit committee is going to make us really address the hard questions. If they're not around, well, we may ignore them. But I do thank you for your inputs.
Councillor Knox.
I'll shut up now.
I agree with Phil's comments wholeheartedly about the audit committee. The comments have been really, really useful and helping me make some decisions tonight. You mentioned that I'll deal first of all with the foreshore clubs. If we've got a number of serious issues with other community groups that we're going to make very angry or annoy, then I think for the time being we should set aside the clubs that are down near the marina. But I also think if we're going to tell other clubs that we have serious issues with their properties or whatever, then before that report comes to council, I would like to see some thought given to alternatives that could be offered to these groups, rather than just go in and say, sorry, your building's had it, you've got to move out. Let's look at the alternatives first, so we've got something to go ahead with. But I also come back to a comment Phil made earlier. And I'm not going to re-nominate for council next time around, but some of the current council probably will. And we need to make those tough decisions in the next 12 months, not after that. Otherwise, the staff are holding the council out to dry.
Yeah,
Councillor Inglis.
Well, it's just to say, Justin, I agree. I mean, I'm a member of one of the fishing clubs down the foreshore, and I agree. And it's prime real estate that doesn't get used enough. But if you gave them plenty of notice that, you know, this is where we're going, your leases might not get it renewed. But you need to have something to say, well, you guys are leaving and this is going there. If you went and punched them and did nothing, they'd come after you like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah. So I said I wanted to, I just want to close this one out. So if we went to the marine users, say wreck fishers, boat fishermen group, and maybe the yacht club, and said, we're about to build a surf lifesaving club. We're not going to renew your lease in your existing buildings, but you can now become a co-tenant in a brand new building. Would just get a quick indication, would councillors think that's a fair alternative?
You have to socialise but on the paper, that's.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
sorry, I'd still go against that. No hypotheticals, come up with a plan. No hypotheticals of what it may be.
Yep. Well, we've actually put it to to a number of those groups. They were about to build a new surf lifesaving club, and would they come and occupy that building? And they basically said no. So I just wanted to test that with the elected member group, because I'll go back to those user groups and say a simple no is not going to be sufficient in terms of the conversation going forward, because we're going to have difficult conversations with many clubs. And I think, picking up on your point, Councillor Inglis, if we're going to, or actually might have been David, Councillor Knox, that if we're going to start talking to various community clubs and sporting groups about potentially having to relocate, we shouldn't do that exclusively from the marine users, given that we should have similar conversations with them as well.
And I agree, but you need to go to them, Justin, and say, well, your lease is going to expire in 2028. We're not going to renew your lease, and we're going to build a cafe or a hotel or but if you just go and say lease is up to 28, we're kicking you out, and it sits there. Look, take Sports Fishing Club for instance. They've got a fantastic facility down there. I don't know if you've ever been there. Out the back, it is brilliant. If you just kick them out and let it deteriorate, it'd be a crying shame, because there's been a lot of money spent there. But if you went to them and said, hey, give me a notice now, your lease expires, I think the lease expires in 2028. There's a fair chance that your lease is not going to be renewed. You need to start thinking about what you're going to do. You've got 5 years to plan, but you would need to have something to go in place of it or take it over. If you just let it sit there and rot away, whoever doesn't cancel at that time, that won't be me, but they're going to come after you like there's no tomorrow.
I think
Last comment,
Yep.
and then there's one question and answer.
I'd be happy to back that, as long as each group was approached for their needs.
Mhm.
So what does your organisation need to keep continuing to thrive? And if those needs were met in an alternative, that's on them. If they say no and they offered something that was adequate, I would be happy to back that. But just going back to the Master Shore, the plan for the marina, I remember there were some safety issues with that as well, especially with the sea rescue people, of having a building built in front of them and having no eye line of sight. I think that's what some safety issues definitely put a squish to that plan for a lot of us as well.
just a quick one, if I may. When the information comes back, perhaps that could also include whether we're allowed to sell off a building to the occupier for $1 and they take it on, or whether legally we've got to go out to market. That would, I think, that sort of information will have a big bearing on how we might look at handling that.
Yeah, it's taken us a little while. I'm actually going to extend this conversation, because it's taken us a little while to get to this sort of question around appetite. What I've just heard is that we could have an appetite to sell a dysfunctional building. I'm not suggesting that this is exactly what you're saying, to a community group if they're prepared to pay $1. Is that going to deliver on our strategic directions as a council if we end up with an old building continuing to sit there, albeit it's no longer on our books, but it's now in the hands of a community group? In terms of that risk profile, is that something that we want? We got a high acceptance and appetite to dispose of old buildings to community groups that are probably not going to be able to upgrade it, or do we want to actually look at trying to get better facilities?
I would suggest that by doing that, we are opening ourselves up a can of worms that you're not going to be. It's something we saw at the Kathy's Knitting Club. And when we first meet, we go in the roof falls in and kills 2 people. You know, and Kathy's Nick's got no money to maintain or improve the building, because most of these buildings we're getting rid of, they're end of life. They're 60+ years old. Now, if you were going to be brutal about it, you just take the bulldozers and put them on the ground and get rid of them and sell land. If you were going to be brutal, but I just think selling something to Kathy's income for $1, I just think we open ourselves up to massive issue.
Councillor Simpson?
I think there's buildings out there that we can sell under market value. Be it $1, be it $10, whatever. The dollar value is fictitious, but they signed a contract to maintain or upgrade that building in the next 5 years, whatever it might be. If they can't commit to upgrade, then it becomes one of those diverse buildings or divest buildings.
Councillor
I'm
Todd?
not, stuck between the two. I'm not sure that I'd be approaching community groups and selling buildings for $1.
Or I think.
Or whatever, yeah.
It's a principle.
Yeah.
It's a principle, whether it's $1, whether it's $10. The question is, do we have a very high appetite just to dispose of buildings, just to get them off our balance sheet so that we don't have to maintain them?
Yep.
And in theory, we don't have to worry about someone having a really serious accident in a building that is no longer fit for purpose? Or have we got a low appetite for doing that? Because what we actually want to see is urban renewal of our city, and we don't want to continue to have old buildings continue to sit here and continue to be used when they're past their use by date.
Yeah, so the rest of what I was going to say was around, I think it depends on individual buildings. There are some buildings and some organisations that would be able to, that would be interested in purchasing and would be willing to maintain and upgrade. But I think there are others used by some organisations who, correct me if I'm wrong, have had it really easy for a really long time, and they maybe are not in a position to do anything with them.
Is it? Sorry, is it not part of the process that the options are from this end of the spectrum to this end of the spectrum, and that then the administration brings back the pros and cons of each of the different options on that continuum for decision making, and it's on a building by building basis, you know, and I think that you know, it's incumbent then on the administration to be providing the data and the information to the council for decision making in that space, which takes it from completely divest because council's appetite is just to get rid of it off its books, versus divest in a way which is still delivering some form of public value but helps manage the scenario. And so there'll be multiple different options within those two ends of the spectrum that would need to be discussed for every building. Now, some of the buildings will be more complicated than others, but you know, in essence, it's all of the different options that would need to be discussed and presented back, which then gives rise to showing how big the body of work is that needs to be done around each of the buildings. It's not an easy fix, but it's one that if we take small bites that we can actually achieve.
Yeah, I was going to say each case would have to be individual.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on the organisation and their capacity to be able to manage their own facility as well. Location comes into it too. Is it prime land? My mind goes to the Apex building, sitting on a massive block of land, one little building, 2 members, hardly used. That is a waste of council's money. Big time. That one stands out. So, and community value, keep coming back to that as well. How much of a value is this organisation or asset to the community? And I think everyone we're going to just have to take on an individual basis.
Yeah. Councillor Border?
You literally took the words out of my mouth. I've literally just written down 3 things. The first one is location. The third one was capacity and the user. So what capacity do they have to maintain a building, even if it could be sold to them? And the second point was condition. If it's a condemnable building, then getting it off our books because it's no longer our risk, I don't think it would achieve that objective of urban renewal. Yeah, you're just passing on the risk, and you're still stuck with this building where the user's got no capacity, it's a low community value, and it's still a high risk, albeit not on our books. And so I think the framework is there with the document you previously had, whether you use that as a base. But absolutely, I think full steam ahead in the direction. And yeah, like Deputy Mayor Pond has just said, those factors of location, the capacity of the user to do something, and the condition of the building. And just to Mark and Bill's, Councillor Inglis and Councillor Simpson's comment before about the marina, I do actually think that's a separate thing. And what Councillor Inglis was saying about having a use for it, why are they moving into the surf club? Yet that's great to consolidate, to get the activate that space. But if it was just going to be an empty spot, unless there was plans for a hotel to go there, for example, or another great use for it, I wouldn't touch it. I just think just let them sit. Let's sort out the other issues first. And then when we have a use for that space, then sort of put the hard word on them and say, look, you kind of have to move because this is a bigger ticket item for the greater community value. So you now have to make a decision. How would you like to move? Not if you're going to move, how would you like to move?
I'm going to go to Councillor Campbell next.
Yeah, everything I was going to say has basically been said. I think with the selling condemned buildings might get us in a bit of trouble with perception as well. So I think, yeah, I was going to say some things, but they've been said now, so that's okay.
I'm just interested in how much sting this is going to cause our budget with capital land value and stuff if we're going to start divesting our land. So that's something we need to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, so that'll be part of it.
A little bit, I suppose.
Yeah,
I'm assuming.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Councillor Knox, and then we'll make that the last comment on buildings. I've let this one go probably a bit too long. Councillor Knox.
There's one thing I think we also need to consider in the report that I didn't hear mentioned, and that's the contribution that the organisation makes to the community from that building.
Thank you, Councillor Knox. All right, with that, we'll now move to just general questions and answers. We do have some very smart heads in the room beyond the ones that are normally in this room. So whilst the questions could potentially be for the council administration, if the subject presents in such a way, we can potentially draw on the expertise of our externals here tonight. So I'll open it up. Any questions from councillors? Any emerging issues, concerns? Councillor Deputy Mayor Pond.
I've got a couple of questions. First one is around our RAP. Just wondering if we're going to get an update anytime soon. I'm pretty curious.
Yes.
Anytime this year, ballpark?
No, within the next month or two. Yeah, so what are we up to? Well, probably November.
Awesome. And the other one was we did an events workshop, but we said that we're going to unpack that and possibly have a weekend one. Is that coming up anytime soon?
No.
No?
Only in the context that we just haven't got around to planning it. Weekends are a little bit of a challenge. We're just trying to find a time slot.
Can I put something to council just to consider then, please, around Australia Day? Previously, we used to have a small event the day before where recipients could come and get their awards. We could all celebrate together. Just wondering if we could possibly go back to that. We haven't had it for the last couple of years. Reason being, I love Australia Day and what it represents, but I hate the day. It's not a great day for everyone. It would be amazing if we could go back to celebrating together without certain people feeling guilty, because that is not a great day for all of us.
Yeah, sure. I'll take that on notice.
And we have award recipients, and a few of them have actually rang me in the last couple of years saying, is it appropriate if I get up and accept my award?
Mm-hmm.
It always is, because that person has earned that award by giving back to the community and being a community champion. But taking away that guilt definitely would help a lot of us. Thank you.
I'll take that one on notice, and I'll follow up with regards to the event workshop. Other questions? Audit committee or Kevin, you got any questions you'd like to ask of either the administration or the council? This is a pretty unique opportunity that we've got, so we want to try and make the most of it.
Oh, that's a great question, Pat. How do you think we're tracking financially?
Based on what we've seen today, you're deteriorating again. That's partly to do with whenever you end the year, there's always a carryover. Normally it's not a favourable one, it's a negative one. So just with what we're seeing with asset values going up means depreciation goes up, doesn't affect cash flow, but it affects bottom line performance. I think that something the council may want to consider is, what are you going to drop off to maintain a level of deficit that you're comfortable with, and what is the no-go point? So what is your tolerance in relation to financial performance? So what's green, red and orange? Because I don't think you've set that at the moment. Each time it's, well, here's the new projection and you accept it. Where's the re-engineering opportunities? What else are you going to do? In the corporate world, if you're running a bank or a superannuation firm, it will be, here's your ratios, you go home, find it, management. So I think there's some of the hard decisions, and it's got to be a trade-off as well. So, but I do think you need to look at what's being invested for the future, because all I see is BAU.
Yeah, and that's, I think it's one of the great things, like Phil said, having you guys here a bit more regularly and having some guidance around it, because, you know, we are going to be sailing some tricky waters, and until some announcements start getting made and some money starts getting thrown around, it's, you know, people say to me, what's happening with hydrogen? Nobody's talking about it anymore. Is it going ahead? Is it going to happen? And, you know, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky, that, you know, obviously we can all see it and we all hope it's going to happen, but if it doesn't, what's plan B?
Yeah, management have a very difficult job with running the future as well as dealing with the past legacy issues. So it's not an easy gig.
Oh yeah, I fully understand
that the executive have got, and they are running a bit of a tightrope. But I think some sense of urgency needs to come in, and some decision making needs to be done as well, and some positions taken.
I agree. I think, you know, it's going to have some really tough conversations to be had, some decisions to make, and aren't going to make people happy. But at the end of the day, it's got to be sustainable.
Can I also just add a discussion that Grant and I had earlier, is that your budget is full of a big lump of hope at the moment. And yes, you need to do all of those things about your bottom line and what you're not going to go past. But you also need to, I mean, you're holding on to the balloon of, will there be a hydrogen plant? But from your perspective, what does that mean for your financials? Where are you going to get the money from the hydrogen plant? Is it because there'll be 500,000, you know, new houses built, and you'll get rates, or is it something else? What is it, and when is that? Now you're going to say you can't know because you don't know what the state government's doing, but you're getting very close to that point of having to have enough information that you can at least forward plan. And you can't just say, well, that will be our saviour, because you actually haven't identified what it is that saviour is going to be.
Well, at present, it's nothing. It's just a thought bubble. And, you know, we've got to live in the present and can't worry about the future. Can't go back to the past. Well, wise man once said to me, you can't change this, you can't change yesterday, can't predict tomorrow, go live today.
But what you have to also go is, well, we've got a long-term financial plan. Is that taking into account additional revenues coming in? What additional revenues, and where are they coming from?
Can I just respond to that reference about hydrogen? Probably in terms of doing sensitivity analysis or confidence analysis, I'm 95% confident that hydrogen jobs plan will be announced within the next month. What that translates to in terms of revenue or revenue streams for council, in the first instance, the state government will purchase some land from us. And we know that will be a multi-million-dollar transaction for council, so that will put some money in our bank account. They will then build something. Unfortunately, at this point in time, there's still a question mark about whether that development will be rateable or not, based on the fact that they haven't changed the Electricity Act. That was what was behind that comment and question today. We believe that it will be, but we have to confirm that. That's for the hydrogen jobs plan itself. For Port Bonython Hydrogen Hub, with the lease and then subsequent land transactions that will occur there, that will generate revenue. We've seen the deeds of development, so we've got confidence that revenue, rate revenue, will come online as those developments occur. But that's further down the track. But just wanted to respond to your comment that hydrogen will happen.
And that's good because, you know, like I said, we'll believe it, but you know, it's just gone really quiet, and people aren't talking about it like they were before. And it seems that sometimes these things seem to drift. Like the announcement is going to be, it's going to be in August, and it's in September, now it's going to be in October, and if it drifts past Christmas time, that's when people are going to start getting really antsy.
Councillor, I'll go to Councillor Knox next.
You may not be able to answer this one. Any movement on the motel?
Yes, there has been some movement, but probably not in the direction that we were hoping for. So I think within a matter of days, if it's not already been confirmed, the property has been sold to another party as opposed to the hotel developer. And the other party, I think, is looking at doing a refurb of existing, not a new build in the first instance. The hotel proponent is probably going to be looking for another piece of land to build a hotel on, which will have to come to council because there is no other land available other than state-owned Crown land down along the foreshore area.
The other thing that I was going to mention, it's I sense there was some reluctance to charge full tote odds basically for shack rating under the new system. And something popped up in one of my feeds the other day. Was a shack for sale at Miranda, which is the other side of Port Augusta on the way to Port Pirie. And I just happened to look at the rates for Miranda. It was nearly $1,800 for this particular property, which is a shack site. So just food for thought.
Yeah. Just in relation to that discussion about the hotel developments, that's all sort of second-hand. Council's not party to the actual transactions that are occurring or not occurring. So whilst that's my understanding at this point in time, it is confidential. And I assume there'll be some sort of announcement come out from one party or another very soon. And in your comment, Councillor Knox, about the value of shacks, I think where we landed, Grant, with the discussion about shacks was that there probably shouldn't be a different differential for shacks, and effectively the difference in rate revenue will be largely driven by the capital value. I think is that where we landed with the rating discussion. Okay.
If that's the case, it sounds right to me.
Yeah.
I got to just
push the button.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get responses from all the councillors, but from the conversation on the night, I felt that there was some appetite for a lower differential, probably higher than they're currently paying, but lower overall. That was my feeling, that there was an appetite for a differential for both shack sites and rural living. But maybe I misread it. That was how the conversation and responses.
Can I just ask Grant, how many councillors didn't reply to your ask?
I got 3 responses for that.
Other questions, Councillor Border?
Yeah, but why I asked why my fellow councillors weren't replying to these surveys?
Councillor Border.
Yep, the getting back to Grant's question before about decisions to be made, who prompts those decisions? So, and I'm speaking candidly, trust tree, right? So, did the administration prompt the councillors to say, look, here are some opportunities and risks, here make these decisions based on how the theme of the night has gone, and we're looking at opportunities. I think the words were like, you know, where are we betting? There's a lot of hope in that budget. 2 points is I actually thought the budget was not including the rate revenue potential yet. So it was a very conservative budget, so that it was hedging on the side of here's what we know we're going to encounter as far as costs go. There's potential and high likelihood of step increases in rates, which is how that income would look, being a step increase in the rates. So that was the first point. But then, yeah, another 2 questions. What prompts the decisions?
Let me answer that one then.
Yep.
Because I might not be able to remember the other two.
Yeah.
Your executive should be bringing that to council. So executive should bring a strategy.
Yep.
Strategy should contain options, an agreed path with financials and risk attached. So it should be coming from this side to you guys rather than from you back the other way. Now, you do have input as you work through your strategic plan, but the executive should be bringing it to council.
Okay, thank you. And then what areas do you suggest? So from an audit and risk committee, from what you can see from the outside, the idea of maybe it's not possible, but the idea of land banking or the council taking a punt, a bet, whatever, we think this is going to happen. Across the range of topics that we've discussed today, state government, federal government will be slow on the uptake, have been slow on the uptake, are only just realising, as Jade was saying before, we need houses now. We know we need houses. Do we have access to land? Can we engage a builder? How do we start that process? Is that an area where you might suggest or that you would recommend we take?
Well, again, your chief executive has put it on the table. I'd be saying back to the chief executive, bring us the proposition, what you're talking about.
Okay.
So here's the options. What else are you considering? And you inform that through your strategic planning process. You'd say, well, what are the opportunities? Where should the focus and priority be going forward? So you look at all those different forces of work. What is the run the business and what is the invest in the future side?
Yeah,
going forward. But it comes from there to you guys.
Okay. And we could raise a motion or we could ask a question. So, hey, can
ask any question you want back there? Yeah. Or have you considered that would normally, you may do a corporate SWOT and in the opportunities that may be identified there and further works then undertaken on that. So there's different ways of identifying opportunities through your planning process.
Thank you.
Other questions? I've lost my screen. Anyone online got their hand up? No? Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we will pull up stumps there. Thank you very much for your participation and contributions tonight. And thanks to our externals. It was really privileged to have your time, not only during the course of the day, but also to sit through tonight. So we appreciate that. And hopefully you got a little bit of better insight in terms of some of the conversations that the councillors grapple with from time to time. So we'll close the meeting there and let everyone head off. Thank you.